No, I'm happy to do it.
So, Dennis McKenna, here we are yet again in South America, in Peru. What keeps drawing you back? I mean, you're a scientist. You know, you're obviously exploring the potentials of the medicines that the South American jungles can provide. Is it that? But you also seem to have managed to squeeze in a fair bit of practice with the jungle medicines, with ayahuasca, at the same time.
Well, it's true. Well, multiple factors. I guess multiple things keep me coming back. I've been coming down here on a more or less regular basis since 1981, and when I first came to Peru as a graduate student working on my thesis, and I guess it was interest in ayahuasca and these other hallucinogens or sacred medicines that brought me down here. And I'm still very interested in all that, quite involved in all that. But when I came down here, I saw much greater, hopefully a much greater potential, a bigger picture, if you will. And, now, almost 30 years later, I have a chance to kind of return to the Amazon and look at it from a different perspective. I've also inevitably been involved in ayahuasca. I've watched the ayahuasca tourism phenomenon evolve, and also seen it become much more popular in the northern, in the States, other parts of the world. So ayahuasca seems to be reaching out in some ways, and I think we've had this conversation before. I think that what we're seeing is effectively the Amazon is marshaling its most intelligent plants to try to send a message to humanity that we need to wake up to what is going on. The the global biosphere is in crisis now, and we can't afford to be casual about it anymore. This is the pivot point. We've got maybe 10 years, if we're lucky, maybe 5 years before we reach the tipping point.
What do you think will happen at that tipping point?
Well, I think there's a number of possible scenarios, and I don't think that we need necessarily to be alarmed about it, but alarm leads to panic, and you don't know what to do. But I think potentially a number of trends are coming together: the depletion of petroleum resources, the accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, especially methane, which is more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and I think that may play a role in the tipping point as the Arctic tundras begin to thaw. There will be vast amounts of methane released into the atmosphere, and that could accelerate this global warming phenomenon by orders of magnitude. And we need to try to prevent that if possible by reducing greenhouse gases in whatever ways we can. One of the biggest contributors to global warming and greenhouse gas emissions, as we know, is tropical forest deforestation. 20 to 30% of all carbon emissions is due to tropical forest deforestation. So this is a consequence of unsustainable and poorly conceived land use policies, mostly in the countries with tropical forests. At the same time, that they are burning the forests down, along with emitting carbon gases, they're also burning a resource for medicinal drug discovery of incalculable value, potentially trillions of dollars worth of what you might call the pharmaceuticals of the future are out there. We know they're out there, but there needs to be a systematic effort to try to sort through this, what I sometimes call the chemical or the molecular biodiversity of tropical ecosystems to identify and select out these valuable molecules that could lead to new medicines, not necessarily by cultivating the plants or clearing large amounts of rainforest to cultivate medicinal plants. That's not really the way it works. The point to be made is that nature is a much better chemist than people are, and has been for, ever since it's been around. It's been at it for a much longer time. So we need to look at natural products essentially as a resource, and take the ideas for these chemical scaffolds, and you still owe the debt to the rainforest. You owe an obligation to try to preserve this. There are multiple issues around this. There's the intellectual property issue.
Yep.
There's the reason people are cutting down the rainforest is that the land use policies of countries like Brazil and Peru encourage people to migrate out of urban areas into the tropical forest to try to eke out a living using methodologies that are completely unsustainable. They know nothing about farming. They have no way to learn. There are sustainable ways to work in the Amazonian ecosystem that can be sustained. What's interesting is the archaeological record that's emerging now about the Amazon indicates that the Amazon is not a wild, undeveloped ecosystem. It's been intensely managed by human populations for at least 30,000 years in a sustainable way. You can look, it's hard to work on the archaeology of the Amazon because nothing lasts, but huge earthwork structures and aquaculture systems and what we would call today biodynamic agriculture systems, the traces of those things still exist. So it's kind of like, the world is in crisis in so many ways, in so many different areas. And so for myself, a person can only do so much. One person can actually do very little. But if everyone does a little, it might make a difference.
I think, like you yourself, Dennis, and also your late brother Terence, one person can actually inform a lot of other people and let them know. Like Terence was, you've done a lot of scientific work helping ayahuasca come to more attention. And Terence was very, very strategic for his role in the counterculture in popularizing ayahuasca. It wasn't really known before. Terence really made it widespread in his books and his lectures and his talks.
Right. But ayahuasca is only part of the solution. And I think the value of these plant medicines is that they help people to reconnect with the Gaian mind, if you will. They actually do change hearts and minds. They change people's perspectives on their relationship to nature.
Do you think ayahuasca is a bit like the analogy is white blood cells in the body? It's a healing.
Something like that. That's a good analogy because it's not only healing, but it's also an alarm bell. It's something that's telling the monkeys to wake up, before they totally fuck up the system to the point where it cannot be repaired. And I figure we have 10 years at most to do that. And in that time, a whole list of things is going to have to be addressed. The integrity of indigenous cultures, and we have to respect that. We have to respect indigenous knowledge. At the same time, we can't fence indigenous cultures off from the rest of the world. So if we're going to do this development and look at the Amazon as a laboratory of biological diversity, which is what it is, indigenous people who have held this knowledge without any compensation for thousands of years need to be at the table in that discussion. Well, governments do not implement policies that encourage that. In fact, they try to discourage that. And it's really a battle between sort of the corporate mindset, which is extract as much as you can, as fast as you can. This has been the typical model, and forget about sustainability, because we're all going to die anyway, right? And so who cares if we leave a garbage dump behind? Well, I care, and I care for my kids and my daughter's children if she ever has them. That's the perspective we've got to adopt. At the same time, there's human rights issues, there's, the population explosion. I mean, it just seems very discouraging, complicated and kind of discouraging. But so one alternative is you just give in to despair and you just say, well, we're fucked. I don't know if I can use that in a formal interview, but so party on, and just have fun and sort of descend into debaucheries of all kinds and don't even think about it, or say, well, okay, it is a very discouraging situation, but do what you can. I saw a film recently on YouTube called Our World or The World. They said something there that really struck me, which was that it's too late for pessimism. Right? I mean, it's not about pessimism, optimism. It's about doing what we can on the ground as fast as we can to try to slow this thing down. And in this effort, I do think that the plant teachers are very important as far as waking people up. But it's not enough for a bunch of people to come down to the Amazon and take ayahuasca or take these other things. You've got to then put those insights into play, in your own life, spread the information, convince other people.
Well, Dennis, in a 2005 essay, you said, ayahuasca may be the holy grail for the species, and you held out great hope for it. And as you say, it is probably the most predominant entheogen spreading across the planet, spreading at the moment. Mm-hmm. And what it is doing, I mean, on a physical level, it's cleansing, it's hopefully healing people. And I sort of have this intuition that, people in the West especially need to be healed of the Western afflictions and of the heaviness and of the disconnection from the planet. It's reconnecting them to a very visceral experience of Gaia. But as you say, it's not enough. I mean, the Western uptake of ayahuasca, it's penetrating everywhere. And as places like Peru declare ayahuasca a national treasure, second only to Machu Picchu, and rules and regulations for the churches start to come into place around the world, ayahuasca is also spreading around the world, but cuttings are being taken. Do you think, it's not really like biopiracy, but ayahuasca is spreading in the West, people are making money off ayahuasca, as well as the healing with ayahuasca, but it's not really feedback into the indigenous peoples either.
No, it is a kind of biopiracy. Yeah. On the other hand, I don't think any indigenous group or any individual owns the wisdom it is a common heritage of humanity, as is all of this. The indigenous peoples have been the stewards of this knowledge for thousands of years. That needs to be recognized and acknowledged, and somehow compensation structures, whether monetary or otherwise, need to be put in place. At the same time, the movement itself needs to raise its own consciousness. You're right, ayahuasca's, I've been somewhat distressed in some ways to see the way that ayahuasca has become so commercial. The scene down here, the ayahuasca tourism scene, it's not all positive, and so we need to raise our consciousness about it. At the same time, I take a long-term view. I take an evolutionary view, because this is just a phase that's playing out, in the co-evolutionary relationship between humanity and the teacher plants, and through the teacher plants, the biosphere itself. So, we've only, a compound like psilocybin, for example, has been known for less than 60 years. The ayahuasca tourism phenomenon is less than, 30 years old. It really only got rolling toward the end of the 90s, mid-90s up to now. When I first came to Iquitos, there was minimal ayahuasca tourism. A few adventurous gringos came down here, but it was not the commercial activity that it was.
What do you think of the scene in places like Iquitos and Pucallpa with ayahuasca tourism now?
Well, I think that, it's got good and bad aspects to it. There are negative things about it and positive things about it. Every time something like this comes along that can generate revenues, for local people, I mean, generating revenues for local people is a good thing, but there's a temptation to sort of desacralize that mystery, to, again, it seems to be a basic human impulse to grab what you can while you can. And I'm not laying the blame on them. I think there are many people who are, more than happy to buy into that. There's a tendency for any true mystery, whether it's ayahuasca or a religious sacrament or, any kind of spiritual practice is vulnerable to kind of cultism, and the concept of following some person or following something and assuming human institutions want to grab a mystery and take ownership of it.
Make a product of it.
Make a product of it, make a shtick out of it, make a business out of it. This is just what we do.
Do you think ayahuasca is in real danger at the moment of becoming commercial, not just commercialized in the business, but in the actual sacrament itself?
Yes. I mean, but the question is, can one even grow enough ayahuasca, in the Amazon or elsewhere to save the world, for everyone to have access to this type of.
Well, that brings up the whole issue of like pharmahuasca and all the analogs. I mean, I realized just last night we were talking about all the different variations. There's pharmahuasca, there's hayomahuasca, there's Syrian rue, there's Aussie-huasca using acacias. Everyone's got their own conjugation, but then I realized it's like Globalhuasca.
It's like Globalhuasca, and I think that's a good thing. I think ayahuasca is in some ways the knowledge of ayahuasca. And ayahuasca itself is empowering people. It's giving people the knowledge to, you don't have to go to the Amazon. You don't have to deplete the Amazon. The plant teachers are everywhere. Discover them, learn how to use them, teach other people how to use them, grow them, spread them around. This is good. I think this is a good thing.
Do you think that there's still the essential diva or the spirit in the pill? Like, for instance, I heard recently that there's such a thing as the universe in a pill, or ayahuasca in a pill, with the Bernays opposites chemically constituted down to a pill and another pill with the DMT.
Yes. Well, yes.
That sort of changes everything. If that could hit the streets,
in some ways, that changes everything, right? Because it's a technology that could be developed without depleting resources. The impediment to that is. Is that going to be just another illegal drug, just a drug that, goes to people through those channels? Or is it actually possible to change consciousness enough that this could be somehow integrated into our society? What our society lacks, what Western society lacks, and what people come here very much to rediscover is a tradition, to rediscover this knowledge, a tradition of how to use these things in a conscious manner, something as simple as a rite of passage. Our culture doesn't have any kind of institutionalized rites of passage. All the meaning has been sucked out of it. What is the rite of passage of the average, 18, 19-year-old? There's no way to, and society discourages, any true mystery is a threat to the established power structure. That's why these drugs have been suppressed. It didn't start with the war on drugs. It started with the pharmacratic inquisition. Religious institutions, the last thing they want their members to experience is God in a direct manner. So in some sense, these plants, they become like the bioweapons of the other side. of that movement. But I don't like the term weapon because that implies you're harming people. These are healing substances, but they're a way to sort of counteract the global corporate mindset that the earth, that nature exists apart from us. Nature is not intelligence, it's simply something that should be exploited and used and patented if possible, and if it can't be patented, then prohibited. So I have a lecture about intellectual property called What is not patented is prohibited. So I think you're seeing that dynamic, and I think that, we have to intelligently learn how to use these things, develop things like pharmahuasca, which are capable of being more widely distributed without disrupting ecosystems. And the main issue is that what ayahuasca always tells me, three things. Number one, you monkeys don't know shit. Always remember that. You know very little. Number two, you only think you're running things. And number three, wake up. And that's kind of the message, I think, that's coming out of these biodiverse ecosystems. I mean, and, we're not running things, not the indigenous people, not the shamans who set themselves up, not the Western people who set themselves up, or the ayahuasca. This is all part of the dynamic of what's going on. We're not really running it. We're players in a co-evolutionary drama. Where is it going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? We know that ayahuasca is going to be around in some form. Yeah. The question is, are we going to be around in some form?
There seems to be a real critical mass of people who have taken ayahuasca and are taking ayahuasca, and it's spreading so rapidly. Like the vectors of transmission are such that it's reaching from the counterculture to the middle ground culture. Ayahuasca's always touched the minds of all classes, all races, all genders.
Right.
But it really seems that it's been snowballing and it's gotten to this point. I wonder if the ayahuasca in a pill sort of takes off, if that will become more recreational, or if the experience itself is so if you take away the vomiting and the purging and that experience, but you have the profound spiritual connection, it almost isn't recreationally. You can't go out in a club on an ayahuasca pill. You'd still be going through the same experience.
Right.
Is there something in the spirit of ayahuasca itself which is a fail-safe against that type of commercialization?
Well, as you say, the ayahuasca beverage has built into it, these challenges. It's hard. You can't really take it recreationally. You can't abuse it because it's not fun. Right?
If you boil it down to a pill, you get rid of those.
You get rid of those, right. So you get rid of those, you sacrifice that. And I'm not sure we should sacrifice it. I'm not sure. But on the other hand, in that form, it can spread much wider. And I think it's important that, I hate to say it, but still the rich and powerful elites still run the world. They're the ones that need to be woken up to this. So you can't concentrate on them exclusively, but you have to find a way to get this medicine, to get this message, if you will, to the people that are in positions to make a difference. And that's, heads of corporations.
I hear that happening with ayahuasca. I very much hear that the upper classes, the elites, I know certain shamanic practitioners who regularly travel the world and deal with those levels of people. It seems like they are switching on.
Yes, and I'm encouraged like that. But let's see, the proof is in the pudding. Even an elite can come and have a profound experience. It's what they do in the, as the follow-up to that. Do they change their behavior? If they run a corporation, do they change policies? Do they, where do they put their tremendous amount of power and effort that being able to move large amounts of capital make available to them? What are they going to do? Money is just a form of energy. And, the question comes up. So look at it from a hard-headed businessman's perspective or a corporate perspective. How much is the Amazon worth? You know, how much are these biodiverse ecosystems worth? Well, how do you put a price on something that's undiscovered? It's worth everything. I mean, we're talking about this survival of planetary life here. So you can't really speak in those terms, but, you know, to get just a few $1 million together, which is a drop in the bucket to try to put on the ground some of these efforts for sustainable management of tropical ecosystems, and to make that work, it seems tremendously difficult to do that.
Do you think
and yet so many resources are, purposed toward other things, war being one of the main ones, the proliferation of internet technologies, which again, in general, I think that's a good thing because it allows information to propagate faster. But by comparison, it's a small amount of effort.
I was wondering if we, as you said, ayahuasca is not the only answer, but it seems like there's still an evangelical sort of quality to that first blush with ayahuasca and people's first experiences. But it does seem to be reaching out and connecting the majority of people who are into the plant sacraments on the planet. Like it's really tendrils are enveloping the world. But do you think we're just changing one drug almost, or one medicine for another? Like the 60s acid revolution really believed that they could change the world, and if everyone just took acid, everything would be okay. And now they're just saying if everyone just took ayahuasca, everything will be okay.
Well, I think there is a danger of that, although I think that we are evolving. We're learning slowly how to approach this. When LSD hit Western society back in the late 50s, early 60s, we had no context at all for any of these. Over time, we've begun to develop context. We've seen a revival of interest in indigenous practices. We've seen an increase in respect, a sort of raising of consciousness, knowing that, based on the realization that we really should be talking to the people that have been the stewards of this for a long time. At the same time, I think we have to be careful of evangelism. Evangelism and fundamentalisms of all kinds, I think, are dangerous, because what they do is they provide opportunities for people whose main goal is power to seize the power. For every person that wants to become a spiritual leader, there are legions of people who want to latch on to that and become followers. And when you become a follower, the demonic bargain that you have to make to become a follower is to give up your own critical faculties, stop asking the difficult questions. So I think it's important to question everything and think for yourself. This is another important message, I think, that ayahuasca and these other medicines, encourage. You don't have to buy into any shamanic tradition, any religious faith, any of these kind of institutional things that have been implemented so that people can say, oh, well, I'll join this cult, I'll join this religion, I'll do this practice. I don't have to really think about it anymore. No, we have to think about it. We have to realize that, it ultimately the teacher is the plants. It's not the shaman, it's not the priests, it's not the heads of corporation. That's what's interesting about psychedelics, because ultimately it comes down to an interaction between one individual mind, brain, and the plant teacher. And paradoxically, you'd think that reason is our friend. The ability to think is our friend. The ability to ask questions is our friend, and to question everything. As we know, like with the ayahuasca tourism phenomenon here and also in the States, it's not all positive. There are great negative aspects to it. And that is not.
What are some of the negative aspects of it?
Well, for example, the proclivity of many shamans down here to abuse women, because, I mean, that's one example. And, to essentially use it not as a tool to open people's minds, but as a tool to control people. I mean, I think that's the danger, to control people. I mean, that's only an aspect of it, but to control what people think and, to set up rigid ideologies and rigid dogma and doctrine that people are expected to follow. I reject all that. I think that people should learn to form their own alliances with these things. So the fact that people are rediscovering these shamanic plants in all parts of the world and learning to use them, that's a good thing, because that's individuals taking the initiative and figuring it out for themselves. So I think that I think that's one of the good trends. But at the same time, there are forces pushing in the other directions. Forces that people and forces that want to co-opt it. For example, just maybe it's a trivial example, but in Brazil, as we know, ayahuasca has been the sacrament of several of these syncretic churches since about the 30s, right? And the Brazilian drug authorities have taken a look at that, and they've said this is not really a problem. This is okay under our regulatory system because it's a religious practice, it's a sacrament, and people are not being hurt. Many people are being helped. So they've essentially come to terms with ayahuasca in Brazil, except that now these religious institutions in Brazil that are empowered to use ayahuasca in their ceremonies are saying that's the only legitimate use, right? We own this, and if you want to use ayahuasca secularly for psychotherapy, for example, or shamanic healing, technically you can't do that in Brazil. So you've got this strange situation, this strange regulatory situation in Brazil where religious institutions are dictating drug policy. I don't think that's good. Why should the UDV or the Santo Daime be able to tell me or you how we're going to relate to ayahuasca when it's essentially an individual relationship? So this is this tendency to institutionalize and co-opt this knowledge, but the knowledge is an individual thing, and people should use it consciously. They should use it compassionately. They should be aware of their own tendencies, and everyone has it. And I don't accept myself, to use it as an instrument of power. It's a complicated thing, and I'm not making a lot of sense here. Maybe I'm not clearly articulating, but I think you get the drift.
Do you think on the other side of the coin, like as individuals go back, I sort of see at the moment we're going through the second wave of global shamanism, where the first wave went over to the jungles and studied with indigenous people and learned about the medicine. And I see so many people now that have gone back to their native communities in the cities and the urban archipelagos, and they're having to sort of retrofit ayahuasca to fit their environments there.
Right.
And do you think that they're on their path and they're losing some of the dogma, they're making stuff up as they go? But do you think that's a healthy thing or a negative thing?
Well, I think we have to. I think we have to develop our own institutions and sort of cognitive understanding around this. I don't think that we can, we can't adopt shamanic practices into our culture. We tried that, with Eastern philosophy.
In general, we can't do it.
In general, we can't do it. We do have to develop our own shamanic rituals and our own relationships to these things that are part of, that are more integrated into our society, so that it can move through society in a more appropriate manner. I think that. So again, I think that along with the working with this plant technology and learning how to use plants in our environment, learning the Globalhuasca wisdom, if you want to call it that. You know, what also has to come with that are, I suppose it's impossible to get away from institutionalization, but we have to be careful to avoid rigidity and dogma. We have to develop methods that work, that are not controlled by any religion or any corporation or even any particular indigenous group. I mean, you know, I think we have to do it on our own, you know, and I'm not sure that, I think one thing that concerns me is many people are rediscovering ayahuasca, and this is all happening, and there seems to be a global wave of what you might call, what Terence has called the archaic revival, you know, a new resurgence of kind of a tribal perspective. And that's all good, you know, because that's a recognition of our unity with nature and our dependence on nature. At the same time, you know, when you're within this new society, this emerging society, you tend to think that, well, you know, we're on the cutting edge and we're making a difference and, you know, we're going to save the world. We should always remember 90% of the world doesn't know about this and doesn't give a shit, you know, and those are the people that somehow those consciousnesses have to be changed. And I don't think that you can change the perspective of 90% of the world. They're just trying to eke out a living, you know, some way or another, and just survive. What you have to change is the 10% of the world that is in a position to make a difference in the formulation of policies going forward. And, you know, that's where these medicines, I think, have their real... And, you know, it's an experimental process. We're making this up as we go along. We're learning as we go along. Like, I can look at this event here at Chimbree and see that there are many positive aspects to it. But I can also see that there are many negative aspects to it. And it's a matter of proceeding slowly, keeping our eyes open, thinking clearly, not moving too fast, being willing to listen, you know, to other people, to people that have more knowledge and experience, and try to respect what they know and to agree to a certain degree, you know, integrate those types of that type of knowledge, rather than assuming that we know more than we know, and based on untested assumptions, moving forward in a way that's not always, you know, not always entirely positive, and in fact may be destructive to the movement. I mean, I'll be very interested to see, you know, what the fallout is from Chimbree, because, you know, here's a guy who came to step completely out of his own culture, came to the Amazon, had a revelatory experience. It opened his heart. He wants to do something, and he is doing something. The question is it proceeding in the right way? You know, the integrity of the intent is not in question. You know, it's the implementation, as they say. The devil's in the details. How do you do this? Like, I'm very interested right now to see, just in the 10 days I've been here, how the conversation has changed about what is the future of Chimbree, you know, which has made a big splash in the ayahuasca community because it's, you know, it's all over the internet, it's on Facebook, there's infrastructure here, there's been considerable resources sunk into this, and that's all good. What are you going to do going forward? I mean, do you want to set up another ayahuasca ranch, another boot camp for space cadets? You know, is that going to help the situation, or is it going to ultimately harm the situation? But then other directions have been discussed, you know, for this. Concentrate on research, concentrate on, you know, this could be a tremendous biological research station for people interested in all aspects of Amazonian ecology, botany, you know, the sort of holistic study of this ecosystem, that might be ultimately a better direction to go, because there are results that come out of that, And I don't diss people coming down here and having these experiences, and each person goes back and implements it in their own way. I mean, I'm very impressed and encouraged by the sort of bubbling up of creativity in art, in music, in science, in all of these different aspects that it seems to be fostering. So that's good, and it's up to each individual, how to implement that. But we don't work in a vacuum, right? So, we're moving from a model of a co-optation to a model of collaboration, and a model of, sort of power structures to collective efforts. And so we can't really work in a vacuum, but at the same time, we can't simply give up our responsibility as individual, thinking human beings, capable of analysis, capable of reason. It's not that reason or science is going to explain everything. It's just kind of a stance to start from. It's a platform to start from. Keep your skeptical antennas raised at all times, and it's useful. It filters out a lot of bullshit, if you do that. So I think that's part of it. I think we're seeing an evolving model. I probably have, if I'm lucky, I have 30 years left on this planet. If I'm not so lucky, not so long. So in that sense, I'm interested to see where this is going to evolve in 10 years. I mean, will it be just a flash in the pan? Will it fade away? As global crises become ever more urgent, are people going to forget this, or will different solutions be found?
I think you're right. At the moment,
or will
it
it become
like
so desperate that people will figure there's nothing that can be done, so we may as well just party on?
At the moment, it seems like the Western lodges are still entrenched in the capitalist business model as recreational tourism, or even with good intent to show people a spiritual, underneath the covers, what ayahuasca shows. But I almost see what Chimbre could be, and what the lodges of the future could be, is more like a monastery or something where people come in and train for longer periods of time.
Right.
I like to take the myth of Western culture at the moment. The Star Wars mythology is like training Jedis, plant Jedis. But that takes a longer amount of time, takes the effort, and it takes a commitment to really go deep with it, and then to go back out into the world with that fully robust training to make a difference.
I totally agree. And you can't do that in a group of 60 people that come down for 2 weeks.
Just dipping your fingers.
You have to, in some sense, you have to. Again, that there's this temptation to co-opt it or to control it, but at the same time, there does need to be an element of control in order this kind of thing, like smaller groups who, are willing to commit the time and effort to gain the knowledge and then spread it out. That, a psychedelic monastery is a good model, but it's not simply taking the plant medicines, even in a small group. There's also got to be follow-up to that, and these programs should include educational aspects. I think Eduardo Luna's model in Brazil is a pretty good model in some ways.
What's his model?
Well, small groups of people, a place where they can come. It's isolated. It's he brings in various leading luminaries and all sorts of field from ethnobotany to quantum physics. They present presentations. They give people something to think about. It's a relatively comfortable place. It's not comfort is not everything, but if you're so distracted by being in a foreign environment, it's hard to concentrate. So I think that's more the model that I would look at. On the other hand, the downside of that, the other aspect of that is it's not available to everyone. It's a spendy proposition to go to Wassiwaska for 2 weeks. So it costs money, and therefore only people with money can go there. And, but then I don't know how to do it. I don't know what the solution is, because you can't run it, you can't even operate without some capital. So, and interestingly enough, I mean, Wassiwaska is, operates in the underground because of this change in Brazilian policy regarding the use of ayahuasca. I mean, if you look at the Wassiwaska website, there's nothing on there about taking ayahuasca. It's not even discussed. But those who know that you're going there to have this stimulating 10-day-long seminar that will discuss whatever subjects, and that ayahuasca will be part of the experience. They can't actually say that. Why can't they say that? They should be able to say that. Why should they, if they're an ethical organization? At the same time, I know of other groups that are operating in Brazil that are not ethical and very cult-like, very power-oriented, and I'm sure that with the best intention, the government's looking at those types of situations and trying to discourage that. And the only path forward that they see is, we'll sort of assign ownership of this sacrament to the religious groups. And they're legitimate, everything else is illegitimate. I think that's a little rigid, and I think that's a misunderstanding of it. But the religious groups encourage that because, as all religious groups do, they want to own the mystery. And so, they encourage it even to the point of putting their people in key positions of power in Brazil to make sure that this type of policy is implemented. It's not unlike the way that the so-called Christian right or the evangelical Christian movement in the States has insinuated themselves into the corridors of power. And they pull the political levers, and because their real agenda is to take it over.
So you think there could be an evangelical entheogenic future?
An evangelical entheogenic future? Well, yeah, I think there could be, but I won't be a member.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, I think we're living in interesting times, and I think you can't say that it's entirely a negative thing or entirely a positive thing. It is what human activities and institutions always are. There are lots of good things about it, and lots of warts and lots of mistakes and lots of, everything from megalomaniacs to, power-hungry people of all kinds, or just people who, not necessarily after power in the sense of money and status, but power in a certain sense of having influence over people to propagate ideas that may or may not have any validity. And that's where the individual skepticism and ability to evaluate becomes very important. And but I guess I'm saying this from the perspective of a person who is pre-tribal. I mean, I'm a 20th century person, and the 20th century was the century of the individual, and it was the, this tribal thing. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't feel like a tribalist. On the other hand, I see many really creative young people attracted to this kind of thing, and that may be the way it should go. I just don't know. I mean, in 5 years we may have a better perspective on it.
Do you think we have 5 years left?
Probably not.
2 and a bit till 2012. And all,
well, I don't buy into the 2012. I don't buy into the 2012 apocalyptic mindset, actually.
But that's
In
the
fact,
Western appropriation of what the Mayans said, that they, 26,000 year grand celestial calendar coming to.
It's an appropriation of it. It's a misunderstanding of it. And in some ways, I think this is another thing that's unhealthy, because it encourages people not to take responsibility. To say, well, it's 2012 is coming, and after 2012, either everything will be shot, or there'll be a global revolution in consciousness, and it'll all be good after 2012. 2012 is just a date. It's 2 years away. I think that, on December 21st, 2012, there'll be a lot of excitement. There'll be all of these celestial conjunctions and celestial configurations will take place. We know this. This is written into the the celestial mechanics of the stars. I think that in some ways I'm looking forward to post 2012, because on December 22nd, 2012, after it's all happened, we'll either not be here because the asteroid impacted or something, or we'll wake up the next day and we'll still have overpopulation, tropical forest deforestation, global warming. So I think that 2012 encourages some people, not all, but some people, to basically not take responsibility. We shouldn't wait till 2012. We need to get cracking right now, and we don't need to tie our agenda to any kind of arbitrary dates. We just need to realize, time's a wasting, and it's time to get to work. And 2012 will come and go in a lot of ways. I can't wait for it to come and go, because then so many people whose energies are focused on that will have to find something else to do. And they'll still have that energy, but maybe they'll have a bit of a wake-up call, like, remember the harmonic convergence? That was supposed to change everything. Did it? I can't see that it really made a big difference. So I don't know. And I'm, again, I'm skeptical. I mean, I think that the Mayans had a great understanding of astronomy, and to a certain degree astrology, and they could see these configurations in the heavens. But what it means for our culture, I think, is difficult to say. And I don't think, what's interesting about the 2012 phenomenon from the point of view of the Mayans, it's almost as though some Mayanists have suggested that, the Mayans have kind of integrated the Western perspective on 2012 back into their culture. And they didn't really have this perspective that 2012 was the end of all time. It was just a point in one of these large cycles, the end of the 13th Baktun or whatever. They didn't necessarily postulate that was the, collapse of the continuum.
Who did have ideas like that was your brother Terence.
Well, I disagree with it, actually, my brother Terence. I mean, did he ever adduce any evidence for it? Other than the I Ching interpretation of the time wave. But, don't get me started on the time wave.
I like the idea of the time wave. It has a very romantic resonance.
It has a romantic resonance, but it was presented as a scientific theory. Scientific theories need to be testable. There's no way you can disprove the time wave theory. Therefore, it's not a theory. If you have a real scientific theory, you establish a hypothesis, then you work like hell to disprove the hypothesis. That's the way science works. He never did that. He never.
Has anyone deconstructed it and tried? Some mathematicians?
Yes, actually they have. And they've raised serious doubts about here's the trick. Here's the problem with 2012. It's based on this time wave, and the time wave has to be anchored to a certain end date, because the premise of the time wave is that it comes to an end. It's a fractal spiral that eventually spirals into some kind of singularity. And so the whole trick is, where do you put that end date? Where do you peg that end date? And then look at the time wave as it stretches back across history. The only person that could interpret the time wave, since there were no statistical, no mathematical approaches to it, or there may have been, but my brother's skill as a mathematician was not up to the task, so it was based on Terence McKenna's interpretation of what's important in history and this idea of novelty. The time wave supposedly describes the ingression of novelty into human culture, into human history. I believe in novelty. I mean, I do think there's something new under the sun, every day. But how do you define novelty? I mean, for example, if you look at, Terence likes to talk about the atomic bomb as novelty, or, something that certainly changed human history, and it is. I mean, it kind of entered human history abruptly. But when did it really enter human history? Was the novel event when Einstein figured out the equations? Or was it when the first sustained nuclear reaction was achieved under the field house at Chicago in whatever it was, 1931? Or was it when they implemented the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb? Or was it when the bomb was first detonated in Los Alamos? Or was it when the bomb was first dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Which of those events was the novel event? Or another example, you can think of LSD as a kind of atomic bomb for human consciousness, but when did that really ingress into human history, right? I mean, the indigenous people have known about the properties of these morning glories for thousands of years. Ergot was known, so it's been around, and then Albert Hofmann synthesized LSD first in 1939. Gave it to his pharmacology team. They looked at it, and in a few animals it didn't look very interesting. They put it on the shelf for 5 years. Was that first synthesis? Was that the novel event? Or was the novel event, 5 years later when he accidentally ingested it and discovered it? Or was it when Timothy Leary, propagated it to the world?
Terence also
Novelty does not erupt into history as point events. Novelty diffuses into history.
I think it's a wave particle thing. That novelty is more of a wave coming in.
It's more of a wave, yeah. It's not. You can't point to, I mean, in rare cases you can, but the rule is that generally novelty, if you look back at history, is something that sort of manifests through time, not abruptly. It's not the punctate theory of evolution. It's the steady change theory of evolution. Christianity is another example. I mean, it wasn't. We think of the coming of Christ and the crucifixion and the resurrection and all the things that are important for Christianity as historical events. They didn't become important till 1,000 years after they happened. I mean, when Christ was teaching in the Sinai, and he was just some kind of a political rabble-rouser who was crucified because the government identified him, as a potential threat to the established order. And when it happened, I mean, nobody noticed. It wasn't important at the time it happened. It was only important later.
One of the other sort of adjuncts of the time wave was this idea of the quickening, of the things were speeding up, and as we got towards that 0 point of singularity, that there would be an exponential speeding up of things and a novelty coming through. A lot of people who even don't even know about the time waves seem to have been running with that theory of a quickening or of time speeding up, or do you think it's just a very busy Western culture?
No, I don't think time itself is speeding up, but I think the pace of change in Western culture is speeding up, and that we are moving towards some kind of singularity in that sense. I don't think you can put a date on it, but I think the technology and the spreading across the planet of these information technologies, the rapid increase in computing capabilities, social networking technology, these sorts of things, they are bringing about this change. And the singularity by definition is something that exceeds our capacity to understand it. So it's very hard to say what what the singularity is going to look like. You know, I mean, it's kind of like the psychedelic experience in that sense. You know, by definition, you cannot understand it. You cannot adequately describe it. So I do think, I mean, paradoxically, I suppose, I tend to believe more in the technological singularity than the spiritual singularity.
But do you think they're both paralleling each other? Because
I think they're paralleling each other, and they're also boosting each other along. I mean, they're reinforcing each other, and maybe at some point they'll merge together. I mean, what would happen, for example, if virtual reality technologies were to reach the point where you could choose to spend, you know, most of your time there? That would change perspective. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying that's something that will be possible. What would happen, for example, if it were possible to download your consciousness into a silicon, you know, into an artificial intelligence matrix of some kind? And with that would come immortality and increased, you know, access to all information and all that.
How much of those do you think start to bleed into the shamanic realms, though, like the spiritual realms? Like,
well, obviously they impact the spiritual realms, and it may be that shamanism is what we really are is in training for. Shamanism provides techniques to prepare ourselves to live in that kind of world. You know, I mean, it's very interesting if you talk to, you know, someone of my generation or maybe a little older, and the idea, if you propose the idea, well, what if you could have an implant, you know, a neural implant in your brain that would give you total access to all human information? Most people in my generation would be appalled at the very idea. I'm not putting an implant in my brain. Are you kidding? You know, but I've noticed in the younger generation, they're saying, bring it on. You know, I can't wait.
And what if we already have an implant in our brains called DMT, and we could actually secrete and navigate with that through the realms that it opens up more effectively?
Well, in effect, we do, but you can't be loaded on DMT and get very much accomplished, you know. I mean, you can have the experience. Again, this comes back, you know, I mean, I'd still like to be able to, you know, open a can of tuna fish, you know, read a page of Flaubert, you know. I mean, we're in meat space right now, you know, and so, you know, I mean, I don't think that we're going to save the world if everybody is just going around stoned all the time. You know, I can't. Maybe I'm wrong, but you know, it's hard to live in the real world and be in the spiritual world at the same time, or in the DMT world. I think you have to go there, grok it, and bring back the knowledge and try to implement it on the ground. And right now, on the ground is that we're you know, we're biochemical engines. We're meat, you know, and so those are our limitations. Maybe in 20 years it will be possible to translate our consciousness into some kind of cybernetic entity that is not limited by time and space. I'm all for it, but it's going to be a tough transition because, again, who gets to do this? Does everyone get to do this? You know, or is it based on, you know, your power, your wealth, your connections that let you transition into this space? So we may see a bifurcation too of culture in that sense, that a certain fraction will elect to spend out their days in virtual reality, and another fraction will be left back on Earth to eke out, you know, some kind of bare existence based on whatever's been left behind. I don't know.
Dennis, it's been 10 years this year in April that Terence left us. What do you think he would have thought of the culture that's evolved since he's gone? And
well, I think that he would have been not really that surprised. It's kind of, you know, his ideas were very much ahead of their time. A lot of the stuff that he was talking about in the early to mid 90s when he was kind of at the peak of his speaking career and all that, a lot of those things are coming about. So I think he'd say probably, what he always said, which is things are exactly where they need to be right now. What is happening is exactly what ought to be happening right now, and relax, in a sense. I mean, don't give up the effort, but realize that, we monkeys are not running the show. We're players in this co-evolutionary process that spans thousands of years, that spans evolutionary time frames. That's part of our human limitation. We think 50 years is a long time, or 100 years is a long time. They're blinks, in historical time, and especially in biological time. So we need to remember that, each of us we're privileged, I think, to live in this age, but we have to remember we're only seeing a very tiny slice of the whole drama, and so we can't really know where it's going, and we can't really know what's controlling it, or more likely nothing is controlling it. It's just kind of a phenomenon that is developing its own momentum. It's self-organizing. I don't think that I believe in the Gaian mind, but I don't think the Gaian mind works in the way that our minds work. Because it's much bigger in time and space, and we can only understand a very small portion of it. This is the inherent limitation in some ways of science, because science is very good at looking at very tiny slices of reality and dicing them up in detail and looking at, very, very specific phenomena in great detail. The structure of the cell, the structure of the atom, these kinds of things. It's much less facile at putting all this together into a bigger picture. So what science has given us is a lot of, like a multifaceted picture of various phenomena in nature. But it's, but it's like each facet, it's like we've taken the jewel and sort of smashed it against the wall, and then all of these glittering fragments have been scattered. We have the glittering fragments. We know the pieces of the puzzle. How do you put the puzzle together in such a way that you can make sense out of it and have the holistic picture? This is the holy grail of physics right now, as you know, the theory of everything. Can we get to a theory of everything that makes it all make sense somehow? It's a tall order. I'm not sure we can do it. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. And that's I think that's the bottom line. We each have to keep trying in our own way, and as a culture, which is quickly becoming a global culture, it already is a global culture. We just have to move forward with as much consciousness and compassion as we can muster.
Exactly. Everything's going according to plan.
Pretty much.
Yep.
It's just we don't know what the plan is. Yeah. It's not one that we developed, right?
Excellent. All right, thank you very much, Dennis. Always a pleasure.
You're welcome. So.